The fabulous 355. We haven't done one of these on the series yet, so here we go. Now, back in this, we're going back to 94, I think these came out. Montezemolo had come to power in Ferrari and said, come on guys, no, we need to sharpen their pencils and produce something really good. And this is a spectacular car. It's one of my favourites. Even today, the price of these is still holding up with 430s and 360s, which were 2 generations later. That's how much people like these cars. It was a quantum leap forwards in technology as well. Ferrari were brave on this. We've got the first car they put the F1 gearbox in. It's the first car that had the active exhaust system. They started to play around with aerodynamics under the car, air management. It was 5 valve for cylinders. Up until then, through the 308s and Testarossas and what have you, we'd had quattro valves, 4 valve for cylinder. Now we've got 5 valves for cylinder, so it's got 3 inlet valves, so they managed to squeeze another one in. So there's a lot going on. They really did sharpen their pencil and take a brave leap forward with this car. You had 3 options. You had the Berlinetta hardtop, the GTS, which is like this, where the roof comes out, or the full-blown Spider. Now the Spider, again, it was a sort of step forward. It was a half manual, half electric hydraulic roof. So you sort of helped it the first bit, then it did the rest automatically, which we take for granted now. We just push a button and they do it all themselves, but this was back in the 90s. Advantages, disadvantages, yes, the hardtop as always is a more rigid car. People say they're quicker around the tracks, so hardtops are better for that. The advantage of the GTS is you do get a proper glass rear window, as you have done in all the 308 GTSs and things beforehand. Dinos, you get a proper glass window rather than a plastic one. The only real drawback is, yes, they leak, because they will do, and you have to put the roof panel behind the seat. So for tall people, you do lose probably a couple of inches of leg movement when the roof's behind the seat. But I think that's more a small price to pay for when you're out in the glorious sunshine. Okay, so one of the things we thought we'd talk about whilst we've got this 355 in pieces is catalytic converters. Now, these appeared firstly on 348s. It was an emission-driven media. It's very clever how they work. The exhaust come through, they go through the honeycomb, and it gets transferred into water through this chemical reaction. And there's a couple of sensors. So you've got what's known as your oxygen sensor here. So you've got there's 2 oxygen sensors, which are these little like plugs that go in. There's one at the other end, which is a pre-cat, and there's one at the other end, this end, which is an after-cat. And they feed voltages and readings back to the ECU. So they're managing what goes into the cat and what comes out of the cat. And then you've got this probe here, which again, if you look down with the camera, you can see is literally a temperature probe that goes in. It's actually in the airflow, if you can see inside there. And this is your temperature. This is what brings the warning light on the dashboard. One of the things, these run very hot and they do sort of glow. These do not like unburnt fuels in there. There's only so much they can manage. That if there's normal carbon monoxide, burnt gases coming through, they can deal with that sort of capacity. If you get like a 40 injector or 40 spark plug and you put neat fuel through one of these, they really don't like it and they can't cope. And what happens is they glow cherry red, they get really hot, and it's like a sort of self-generating furnace in there. If they get too hot, then the purpose of this probe is that it brings a light on and says, look guys, you're running too hot. It brings a slow down light on the dashboard, which means your cat's getting too hot. Sometimes it happens just through fast driving, sometimes track days, things like that. If you're really on it, it's saying, no, give the car a chance, it's all getting a bit hot, let it slow down. And it's just managing the cats. So one of the faults that happens on these is if it gets really, really hot, the porcelain inside, the honeycomb, comes away from the can itself. And you can usually tell that if you bang them, they rattle. And in extreme cases, they break up. I've seen them come out like molten lava. It's like molten rock, lava rock in there, and it all just comes out and goes through the exhaust, and the whole thing just falls apart. So if you bang them and you can hear them rattling, it's a good sign that the porcelain inside is all breaking up and you need new cats. Now, these are expensive now. They're not cheap because of the precious metals and that's in them. They're thousands of pounds each. What some people do is, if you look at the size of the holes inside, you'll hear people talking about sports cats and things. Basically, when you look at a sports cat, it's a smaller can,
it still does the job, but it's got bigger, when you look down the middle, it's got bigger holes in the porcelain. So it obviously there is a very slight restriction blowing gases through this honeycomb. So if you make the holes in a honeycomb bigger, then obviously it's a less of a restriction. So there is things called sports cats out there. And there is people that will, what they call decatting the car. So they take this right off and just stick a straight pipe in, and then they stick these in just purely to sort of keep the circuit going. It's not an ideal way of doing it. It fails all the emissions, and you have to swap them back for MOTs. You've got actually two outlets. You've got the outlet coming out through the cat, and there's another outlet above it. So basically, and it's called the bypass system because it basically bypasses the cat. So what happens is, when these were built, obviously the emissions were taken at a sort of a low revs and a standing sort of slow driving. But when you drive faster, what they developed was this system that you have with another outlet coming through this extra exhaust that sort of bolts on, and there's a vacuum operated valve that when that opens, it's called the bypass valve, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. So you're either coming out through the cats and out the back, or you're coming straight out the top pipe, through the valve, straight into the exhaust and straight out the back. Now, the obvious difference is the noise, because it's a shorter route through the exhaust. So once this opens, you'll notice that the noise happens, which is really nice when you're driving it. No, you're driving it slowly. What you don't want, and some people wire these up all the time, that you get a booming loud exhaust all the time, and it can be quite annoying. So it does work well that when you're driving around in town and in traffic, you're just sitting there quietly. But when you're going a little bit more briskly on a road, valve opens and all hell breaks loose, and it does sound really nice. But in some ways, it's a really nice feature for the driver to enjoy, but another way it's a bit of a cheat on the emissions on the cars. Okay, so another quick bit while we've got this car in pieces is brakes. There's two lots of brakes on these. You've obviously got the main brakes, which is the pads onto the disc, but inside here is the handbrake, and it's operated by two handbrake shoes. So if we've got the other one apart. Now, one of the reasons we've taken this apart, there's not many people take this apart on service. That you can look at those very easily, but to check the handbrake pads is a little bit more complicated. So if we go around the other side, as you can see, we've just put this back on loose. You've got to take the caliper off, take the pads out, take the disc off, and then inside here you've got like an old sort of brake shoe assembly, which is what early cars used to have, but this is just for the handbrake. So these pads go in and out, and if I get the disc, you can see that you've got two surfaces in here. You've got the surface for the brake disc pads, and then in here there's another smooth surface, if I'll get the torch and just show you, is for the handbrake shoes. So that's where the handbrakes lock on. Now what happens is, if the handbrake mechanism ever gets stuck or anything, it wears the shoes out traditionally, and what this one's had, you can see the shoes have all broken up. They've overheated at some stage, and it's not uncommon to see this. If someone drives along with a handbrake on, or the handbrake hasn't released, a lot of these cars don't get driven very much, so if the handbrake goes off on the handbrake end but doesn't release properly at this end, the shoes bind, and you can see they've all cracked and broken up. So in these new shoes, it's not uncommon. We've found quite a few of these recently with completely destroyed handbrake shoes. But you have to take this all off to actually see it. Another weak point to check over on the 355s is radiators. You've got the radiators and the oil coolers inside here. So this is all enclosed in plastic. So you've got the air coming through the ducting in the door here. You've got the big scoops going through the side. So it not only brings the air through, it brings all the rain and the dirt and the muck. And what happens, these are really good, these are brilliant, these ones, that they sit in the bottom of the radiator here, and they actually rot out all the bottoms of the radiators. And it's not uncommon to have coolant leaks and corrosion and all sorts going on in here. Regarding the F1 system, while we've got one apart here with the bumper off, you can actually see it. So there's three main components that I can show you. The gearbox is actually still just a manual gearbox. So what it's got is a hydraulic system that's outside of the gearbox that physically pushes the gears backwards and forwards rather than you doing it with a gear lever. So to make all that happen, we've got an actuator here, which is some people call like the octopus. So we've got a series of solenoids and a pump. Now the pump, as you can see in here, for those of you familiar, this is a bigger pump. Now there's two, the original 355 pump was a much smaller pump, and it struggled. So this one's been upgraded and it has a 360 pump in it, which is almost 3 times the size. So it's a much bigger pump, which is more reliable, which is obviously why they upgraded it on the 360s. So we've got the pump that generates the pressure for the system. Now, what it also does is store pressure in the system. So see this black ball, I don't know if you can see up there, that's actually a nitrogen-filled sphere. It's got a diaphragm halfway through. So the pump pressurises the system, it depresses the gas, so it almost stores energy ready for when you pull the gear. It's got energy rather than just the pump spinning, it's got a stored energy ready to select the gear for you. And then obviously you've got these solenoids, so depending on which paddle you're pulling as to where it's going to squirt the oil down to the gearbox. One of the reasons this is called the octopus is that it has got this array of pipes that decide where the fluid's going to go. So when you pull a specific gear at the top, it decides where it's going to send the fluid down to the actuator to actually select that gear. So here we are underneath the car. So what normally happens in a manual, the selector going into the gearbox is a rod here beneath that bellows, and normally you'd have a rod going through that hole, down that tunnel and onto the inside of the car that you're physically selecting the gears. But now what you've got is a hydraulic actuator on the side that will twist and go, so it can twist left to right and go forwards and backwards to select the gears when it's told to by the octopus up the top, and the pressure forcing the hydraulic oil down into this and working it. So that's the 3 main components. Okay, so the last piece of the jigsaw, obviously on a manual car, you've got to work the clutch. So you've got 3 pedals to work. On the F1 system, you've only got 2 pedals. So the car's going to do it for you. So you'll notice there's another pipe here that comes up, which again is pressurised from the actuator down there, that goes down into the gearbox and works the clutch for you. So as the car needs to change gear, not only is it hydraulically selecting the gear, it's also got to put the clutch up and down quickly as well at the right time. So there's a lot going on. So talking about the F1 system as a whole, we've briefly gone around the sort of main components there, but I suppose going back in time, this is the 1990s. These cars, they came out in 94, I think, ran through to sort of 2000. And for those of you who remember, when the F1's team started using F1 back in the Mansell days, now it took them a long time to get this right. The technology back then wasn't capable of thinking fast enough to operate it quickly enough, and we all know now that the gearboxes change in fractions of a second, and everyone says, oh, the 355s and this are a bit slow. Well, yes, they were a bit slow because technology couldn't think that fast. And to get something by you pulling a paddle to work the clutch, select the gear, get the right gear and select it in the gearbox, and then release the clutch, all corresponding at the same time, with a computer that's behind the seat on these, with technology from the 90s, was quite an achievement. And that's why these will, I think they were very brave to bring this technology into road cars. And it still differs today. There's a lot of cars with paddles on the steering wheels, which are actually just an evolution of the automatic gearbox. This is a manual gearbox, which they carried right through 360s, 430s. So it stayed around for a while. It does give you quite an analogue feel. It does sort of go bang, bang. You can feel it changing gears rather than the newer cars today with the sort of linear motion that they've got. So this was groundbreaking stuff, which is why I think the 355 is such a spectacular car. Back in the sort of 80s and 90s, air management and airflow under cars was really sort of getting going at Ferrari. And you're used to seeing the new cars with great big slats out the back and big ducts underneath. But this is where it all started. So we've got, what they've done, they've covered the underneath the car with these big plastic covers. So it covers up all the ancillaries, all the suspension, everything. Gives you this great big flat pan underneath all the way through. And obviously, during servicing and that, you take all this lot off. There's an awful lot of nuts and bolts that you take all these things off. But as it comes to the back here, you can see they start to channel the air out, and then it scoops it up. And the idea was that if you accelerated the air as it went out from the back of the car, it would effectively speed up, which would draw the rest of the car down, which would give it better handling at high speed. So this is sort of where it all started, really. Engine in the back, so we've got some space in the front there. It's quite deep space, but you can see we've got car cover space here.
And okay, yes, again, you can have the tailored luggage, but you can get most hold doors and things in there. This one's particularly nice. We've got the original little torch, which is a nice touch. One of the options you could have was the space saver spare wheel in these that pretty much went diagonally across the boot area and took up all the boot space, but everyone else gets a can of mousse. So you get your Ferrari can of tyre inflator. And then we've got the toolkit. Now, I've mentioned these before. Ferrari do this so well. Beautifully, Shadoni leather designed, all embossed in Ferrari. Just really nice detail. Lovely brass fittings and all the spanners all laid out. They do a really nice toolkit, and the detail they go to. This is what having a Ferrari is all about. When your toolkit looks like that. Okay, so looking now at the other end of the car, obviously. It's all engine, so there's no storage in here at all. So, as I said before, this was a revolutionary engine. We've got the 5 valves per cylinder, which is a brilliant engineering masterpiece to get in. Came with 2 injection systems, basically. The engines were the same, but you had the 2.7 or the 5.2. Basically, it's whether it had single intakes or twin intakes with 2 air mass meters, so you either had 2 pipes here or 1. It's just a difference from Bosch when they made the system. One's a slightly later one. Some people say the earlier cars with the single intake are a bit better. Some people prefer the smoothness of the later cars, but either way, Bosch decided that they could update the system, so they did with twin inlets. But otherwise, a fantastic engine. Really, really good. It's one of the ones that's amazing that it revs that freely as a V8. You have to remember these are V8 engines and they rev that well. And they just sound magnificent. Looking at the maintenance of these, the big question is cam belts. Obviously, you've got to take the engine out because the cam belts are down there and you can't even see them, let alone get to them. So there's 2 ways of doing the cam belts on these. Some people drop the fuel tanks, force their way into the back of the engine, which is not good. It's messy, it's quite brutal, so we just don't do it that way. Or the other way is you drop the whole engine cradle out. Now, it sounds a lot, but you've seen some photos, but it's designed to come out that way. So the whole cradle, you undo the suspension and the whole back of the car drops out so you can get to the cam belts. So that's the big thing on maintenance. Otherwise, the problems on these are pretty well documented, but if you look after them and stay on top of them, they're all right. Out on the open road in the 355. As always, just letting things warm up a little bit. We've got the roof off, so there might be a little bit of wind noise. And slowly, these things are great as you poodle along. But the best thing is the active exhaust. With the exhaust open on these, this particular car has got a Capriccio 2 on it. They came in 3 stages. And some cars work with the sports exhausts, and some don't, and the 355 is just one of those magical cars with a sports exhaust on. So we just let things warm up a little bit, and then we'll see if we can demonstrate that to you. But from a customer experience, it was brilliant. Everybody loves the 355 with the sports exhaust. It's vacuum operated, so as you ease the throttle down, you get the noise. So when you're driving around slowly, it's not annoying. Then as you just build the speed, you'll hear it. What a fabulous noise. This really is what owning a Ferrari is all about. Just manoeuvring around some traffic. And again, you've got power steering on these ones, so really easy to live with. So the F1 system, as I showed in the video, yes, it is an early version. We are back in the 90s. It doesn't change as quickly as the new cars, but it works if you back off just a little bit. When you're normally working a clutch and you're changing gear, you have to back off the throttle, dip the clutch, and change gear. And likewise in this, if you just back off a little bit as you pull the paddle and then accelerate again, it's absolutely fine. It's not as good as the flat-out changes as the modern systems are. Other options you've got to look sport mode on one of these. Again, quite a basic system, sport mode. What that did, it sharpened up the ECUs a little bit, and you've got electronic shock absorbers. There's a little motor on each damper. It just sharpens up the suspension, and the revs are a lot higher on the gear changes. This will change gear on its own if you drive it hard enough. To be brutally honest, you can't, there's not a huge amount of difference. But ergonomic wise, it's a really nice, comfortable car. Something that we do notice on these, this is a left-hand drive car obviously. All the left-hand drive cars, your feet are in a better position as in a straight line. On the right-hand drive, you're always a little bit knees bent, which is all right until you've been in the thing for a few hours, and then your knees hurt. And it's just, I think all the cars were designed as left-hand drive cars, and when they went to right-hand drive, oh, we've got ambulance just coming round. Let's just move out of the way for him. Slowly, it's not too boomy. Some people put or wire the valves up, and it is really noisy at slow speeds. It does sort of get on your nerves. With the valve closed, you can have a conversation with people in the car, and it's not too annoying for people around you. But when you're on the open road, it's spectacular. All day on this. Sometimes you have to feed yourself, but there is an upside to working all these hours and doing these cars. Yes, they're hard. Yes, they're not easy things to work on, and sometimes they challenge you, and sometimes you tear your hair out. But every now and again, you get to go out in them, and it's just fabulous. This is actually my own car, this car, so I can sort of go a little bit differently and open it up a little bit more. But again, I'm like the rest of you. I haven't driven this car. We've just done cam belts and service on it. Through lockdown, it sat in storage for over a year, and it hardly got used. So to actually be driving it again is a real treat. And I'm sure a lot of you are finding that going out in these cars where we haven't used them for so long, you sort of remember why you got them in the first place, and the fact that we should really drive them more. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I've enjoyed driving this car again. I really do have credit to Ferrari. These are fantastic cars, the 355s. Absolutely love them. So usuals on this one, we go through and check the oils, all the hot levels, make sure the fans come in and get it all cleaned up. We're probably ready to go back into storage again, so see if I can have time to drive it. See you on the next one.